Job comes out with this incredible statement, though he slay me, yet will I trust him. Now he's saying, Lord, even though you slay me, I don't understand why. You can even kill me, and I don't understand, yet I'm going to trust you. Now he maintained that for a long period of time, but they slowly wore him down. His three friends slowly wore him down with the pressure of condemnation and building this whole thing up, and then he got into self-justification. And self-justification always leads us down the road to a wrong attitude towards God. And so God had to deal with this area in Job's life, which had developed. Wasn't there in the beginning, but it developed because of the pressure, the pain, and the trial, and the pressure from his three friends who were condemning him all of the time. And so Elihu comes on the scene and begins to talk to Job. In chapter 34 and verses 10 through 12, it reads like this. Chapter 34 and verse 10. Therefore hearken unto me, ye men of understanding, far be it from God that he should do wickedness. You see, Job was saying, no, God is not just. God is unfair. Elihu says, far be it from that he should do wickedness, and from the Almighty that he should commit iniquity. And so he's talking about an attitude that is developing in Job's life. In verse 18 of chapter 34, he says, is it fit to say to a king, you are wicked, and to princes, you are ungodly? How much less to him that is God, that accept not the persons of princes nor the rich. See, he's talking now, Job has developed an attitude towards God. Now, Job was a mature Christian. He'd been on the road a long time, but he was developing an attitude. You know, attitudes can either be with what we say, or can be attitudes of the way we think about God. And he developed this kind of attitude, and it came out of his self-justification. And he begins to, Elihu points this out to Job in chapter 35, and verse 1, it says, Elihu spake moreover and said, thinkest thou this to be right, that thou saidest, my righteousness is more than God's? For thou saidest, what advantage will it be for me, and what profit shall I have if I be cleansed from my sin? Ever thought that? When everything is going wrong, the ungodly people around you are prospering, and everything goes right for them, and you're trying to serve God, you're trying to do the right thing, and everything is going wrong. Have you ever thought that? It doesn't pay to serve God. I know you have. I know you have. Secretly deep down within your heart. I know you've all said, see, Job, that was in Job's heart. And God was about, to get that thing right out of his heart. And it was important. And the lesson that God was trying to teach Job was this: to trust God for who he is, not for what he does. And this is fundamental. If God doesn't settle this within our hearts, somewhere down the line we're going to have trouble. We've got to learn to trust God for who he is, not for what God does or what he doesn't do. We have to learn to trust the nature of God. That's God, his nature. We have to learn to trust in the nature of God. God is just. He is righteous. He is fair. He is true. He is no respecter of persons. He is merciful. He is a God of love. It is impossible for God to do something wrong. That is impossible. God is totally righteous. He is totally a God of love. He is totally just. It is impossible for God to be unjust. Now, trusting in the nature of God is even higher than trusting in a word from God. It's quite easy to trust in a word from God. But when everything is contradictory round about you and you have to trust in the nature of God, just for God, for who he is, that's a much higher realm. It's a different dimension altogether in which God wants to bring us to. God wants to bring us to an implicit trust in his nature regardless of the circumstances. Yeah, Abraham had to face this. God gave him a son which he believed God for. God gave him a promise of a son, and through all the years the son didn't come. And finally, through faith, he believed God, and he got that son from God. God promised him Isaac, and he had Isaac. And God says, now go out there and sacrifice him. Phew. See, he had a trust in God. Not in circumstances around him, not in the seeming contradictions, regardless of the seeming contradictions of what was happening all around him, he still had to trust God. And this is a much higher realm. And God has got to bring us down this road at some stage in our lives. And this was a lesson that God had to teach Job and free him from this area. Trusting in the nature of God. In chapters 38 through chapters 40, we won't read it for the sake of time, but God is shown as God who can contrasted with man, the smallness of man and the greatness of God. Those chapters just cover this. In other words, he was saying, Job, who are you to say God is unfair? Who are you to say all this shouldn't have come upon you? God shouldn't have allowed this upon you because you haven't sinned. God is in control. He's saying, Job, who are you? Contrasting himself with God, who God is, and the smallness of Job. God is always right. See, God was seeking to deepen Job's relationship. And any relationship has to be built on trust. Any relationship, whether it's a human relationship, a natural relationship, or a relationship with God, any relationship is built on trust. And Satan, you see, seeks to undermine that trust. You see, when two people have a good relationship, you'll find that Satan will try and undermine the trust between those two people. Insinuations, lies, all kinds of things. If he can undermine the trust, you see, and trust is the basis of any relationship. And Satan will accuse each other to each other. And see, does Job serve God for nothing? That was the accusation. An accusation to their relationship. He's saying, Job doesn't really love you. He's just serving you. He's in this for what he can get out of it. He's using you, God. You bless him, he'll serve you. If you stop blessing him, he's not going to serve you. Undermining that trust, that relationship that Job had with God. So his trust, his relationship had to be put to the test. And he had to trust God when he couldn't see why everything had gone wrong. And in contradictory circumstances, Job had to learn to trust God. And you know, God was really saying, Job, no matter what happens, will you still trust me? No matter what happens. If I give you a promise and you feel you have something from God and then it doesn't come to pass or you have to lay it down, will you still trust me? Will you still hold that relationship with me?